And now we'll switch to John Oudyk, who is the occupational hygienist in Hamilton, and no stranger to the Mayday audience, since he's been a pioneer in workplace mental health on behalf of OHCOW and mostly on behalf of workers. And part of that work has included investigating survey and then becoming quite expert at the validation of those surveys, so that we can be sure that what we're interpreting as the answer is really the answer. So over to you, John, on your presentation. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Val. Yeah, we asked the question, how important is it to use a valid questionnaire to measure workplace stress? Like, there are a lot of surveys out there in the workplace: engagement, job satisfaction, culture, burnout, work-life balance, things like that. But very few of these commercially available surveys have published their evidence regarding validity and reliability. And there are also disagreements about whether we need to or not. Some saying that this is overkill, but what does it mean to have a valid questionnaire? There are, as an example of some of the multitude of survey services, Gallup, you've heard of the Gallup polls. This organization also makes employee engagement, retention and attraction, well-being, hybrid work, leadership and management, and organization culture surveys. Qualtrics, which is often used by universities and academics to collect data, have a variety of surveys available: onboarding, work anniversary, employee engagement, role change, employee pulse, post-parental leave, employer exit. SurveyMonkey also has its online surveys, and Facebook, or Meta, is also getting into the game. Wherever there's money, there are people who are willing to provide you surveys. Now, surveys have been used in the EU for many years to evaluate the psychosocial conditions, and there are laws requiring you to evaluate the psychosocial conditions, also in many countries in South America. Even in the US, there's a regulation requiring the federal government to survey its people, and these things are, the results of these surveys are available online. For the 2023 survey, there were over 500,000 respondents, and that data is available online for data geeks like me. In Canada, Ontario, we have the voluntary CSA standard set 1003, psychological health and safety in the workplace. And it has 13 psychosocial factors that they suggest need to be assessed. And two of the questions we often get asked is, does your survey measure the CSA 13 factors, and is it a validated survey? And so on the first question, what we've done is we've mapped the 13 factors against the COPSUC 18 or 23, depending on how you count. And you'll notice that the ones highlighted in yellow are not included in the 13 factors, so it goes over and above. However, mapping items to scales is actually quite difficult. And Tony, if you would like to put in the first, yeah, there it is, scale. I'd ask the participants here, where would you fit this question? I feel my job is secure in these 13 factors. So if you'll take some time and select which factor you think I feel secure at my job fits into, I appreciate it. You need to hit submit in order to, okay, I see some people are picking organizational culture, psychological protection, psychological support, clear leadership. Okay, we'll close it out. Thank you, Tony. Now, the second question is, I have sufficient time to complete my work. Which one do you think this should fit into it? We have the question up again. If you could select which factor. Here, most people are picking workload management, but there are still some that are picking other factors. Okay, we'll wrap that one up. Thanks, Tony. I had a couple others, but for the sake of time, I won't ask Tony to repeat that. But here are the 7 items, 7 questions that belong to the Guarding Minds at Work workload management psychological factor. And you can see that from the difference of opinion on which this one fits into, it's not that easy to map these things onto the scales that they belong to. And so this is what the work on validation and reliability tries to do, is to make sure that we know what we are measuring. So there are different ways to assess questionnaire validity. One is face value or face validity. When a person reads the survey, do they agree that this covers what the survey is supposed to cover? And then there's content validity. Face validity is for the users, and content validity is for the experts who set up the survey. Do they agree that it covers what it's supposed to cover? Then there's criterion validity. Can you compare it to a gold standard, if there is one? And it's difficult with stress, is what is the gold standard? Then there is construct validity. Do the scales function the way the theory predicts they do? And that can be convergent, that it correlates with measures that it should correlate with, and discriminant, that it does not correlate with measures that it shouldn't correlate with, and predictive. Can you predict who falls into which category based on the range of scores? So face validity, when we set up the stress assess based on the Copenhagen psychosocial questionnaire, we ran it past a number of worker representatives and did some pilot administrations. And basically people said, yes, it covers it. But during the pilot, they actually said there's some items missing that you don't have in there. We also heard that it was just educational to do the survey itself. And there's always an issue about striking a balance between survey being too long or not fully completely covering the topic that you're asking about. So here are the scales that come with the COPSUC survey. There's work demands, work organization, work relationships, workplace values, employment and job factors, offensive behaviors. These are some of the things that people told us that were missing. Things like shift work with job demands, measures of employment precarity, some other factors, the number of hours you work per week, health and safety conditions in the workplace, the culture in the workplace, demographic issues, obviously. We also added some long, there's a long version of the COPSUC questionnaire, and we took some health and symptom questions, and we created some new offensive behaviors that people were concerned about, like discrimination. The content validity, the experts, if you pick a survey that already exists, like the Copenhagen psychosocial questionnaire, there's an organization that developed it. And so the content validity has been kind of done by them. And they have a nice website where you can take a lot of this from. Also, the survey tried to cover as many theories of workplace stress as possible. And the CSA standard also mentions a number of theories: job demands, effort and reward, job control and influence, fairness and support. And these reflect from theories that have been put forward: the effort-reward imbalance theory, the job demand control model, which was later on supplemented with job control and support, the justice model, and the most recent, which is the job demands and resources model. Now, when you pick a survey, you are picking a theory that goes underneath it, and that will shape the possible solutions. For instance, if you pick up the job demand control survey, you're not going to necessarily pick up some of the justice issues and vice versa. So there are different perspectives on how to approach and measure workplace stress. One is the psychological approach, which focuses on the individual, and it just looks at what's going on between your ears, and sometimes is called responsibilization because it places all the responsibility on the individual. The other is the psychosocial, which looks at the interaction between the environment the person is working on. And so there are both individual and collective responsibilities. Now we have items and scales. Items are questions and scales are groups of questions. And here's an example of the COPSA quantitative demands. How often do you not have time to complete all your work tasks, and do you get behind in your work? And then there are various options that you can provide to these questions. Often strongly agree, neutral, disagree, strongly disagree is used. However, this one is actually frowned upon because something like a frequency is cognitively a little more close to what you're trying to measure than whether you agree or not that you have time. Here's another question. In general, would you say your health is poor, fair, good, very good, or excellent? That's generally called health in general or self-rated health. And here are some results. And it's a deceivingly simple question, which you think may not measure much, but in the literature, it's been noticed that this question correlates not only with mortality, but morbidity, which is amazing in itself. And there are psychologists who are trying to tease out why that question is so good and yet so simple. Now, interpreting the scales, once you've assigned values to the response options, you have to interpret them. So in this case, if you can have a fixed or absolute values. If you have 5 questions per scale and 4 response options, then the possible scores range from 5 to 50 or 5 to 20. The higher score being better and the lower score being worse, and then they're interpreted in this way. Now, you could also have relative values where the scales of different lengths and varying response options, if you convert them to 0 to 100, and some scales could be positive, some negative, and you compare them to the population average. So each scale has its own different benchmark, and then you define what's a meaningful difference from the average. And usually it's somewhere between around a half a standard deviation or sometimes less if it's a very good scale. Now, here are some results from the Guarding Minds at Work scale in the 4 categories: serious concern, significant concern, minimal concern, and strength. And if we look at the list, we see that balance is one of the most serious concerns, followed by psychological and social support. The strengths are civility and respect, and recognition and reward. Those are the 2 strongest. Now, this is assuming that it's a fixed scale, that all are measured the same scale. Now, if we took the same results and put them against the population average, we get a different picture. We still see balance as one of the factors on the negative side, but psychological and social support is actually no different than the average. Civility and respect are better, much better than the Canadian average, but recognition and reward are no different than the Canadian average. It really missed the serious problem in engagement and the other strength in organizational culture. So different ways of scoring have different implications on how you diagnose what's an issue in the workplace. Then how well do each of the questions and the scales perform? Well, if you have a scale from 0 to 100, the average should not be less than 20 or greater than 80, because that's a skewed score. Ideally, it should be 50 in the middle. The percentage missing, if you have more than 2% missing, then you should look at the question and see what could be wrong. We have ceiling and floor effects. If more than 15% are either at one end or the other end of the scale, that suggests a skewed scale. And if any one single response option is endorsed more than 40% of the time, that is worth looking at. And then there's a measure of internal consistency, which is a reliability value. It's either Cronbach's alpha or Spearman-Brown statistics if you only have 2 items. And it should be greater than somewhere between 0.6 and 0.7. And in a correlation matrix, none of the correlations should be greater than 0.7. Now, if you didn't get all that, I'll show you some examples. Okay, here are the COPSUC scales that we use, and here are the mean scores. You'll see that all the mean scores are above 20 or below 80. And so they're somewhere in the middle, but some, like job insecurity, are quite low. And others, like colleague support, are quite high. The Cronbach's alpha, we have a couple on the English version that are a problem. It's interesting that quantitative demands in the English version has lower reliability than in the French. And we have the opposite for some of the other ones. Then we have missing. Meaning of work, for some reason, meaning of work, both in the English and the French, is above 2%. Recognition also, leadership and social support, that might be because some people who fill out the survey may not have a supervisor because they are the boss in the place. And then ceiling effects and floor effects. On the bottom, job insecurity. In Canada, we have less job insecurity than in other nations. So in other nations, this one would be much lower. On the top end, we have meaning of work, role clarity, social support from the supervisor and colleagues, and job satisfaction, which are all positive scales. So it's nice to be high, but the scale is somewhat skewed. Now here's a perfectly balanced scale. You have a bell curve with the average being 50 right in the middle. And here are some skewed ones. Meaning of work, the average score is very high, 77. Job insecurity is very low, 26. The comforting thing is that these are good things. Then we look at each of the options for every questions and highlight the ones that are over 40%. So here, work fast, the middle option was endorsed, clear objectives and know what's expected, the second highest one. And here we have a few more. And let's take a look at pleased with your job satisfaction, 47% were on the 4th option. And if you look at the 4th option is satisfied, so 54%. So even though this is skewed, it still tells you something that's reasonable. Now, how are the scales correlated with each other? So with correlation, we look at 2 factors and see if they change together or not. And here, a perfect correlation is a correlation of 1. And you can see they're all in the line together. A strong correlation is 0.9. It's almost a straight line. 0.5, it's getting a little weaker. And this is no correlation at all. You can't draw a line through that. But it can also be negative. the same thing. So here we have a correlation table, and we looked at work pace and quantitative demands before, and the correlation is definitely less than 0.7, so that's okay. There is some correlation. However, when we look at quality of leadership and social support from the supervisor, we see a strong correlation. And when we look at trust of management and justice and respect, we see a strong correlation. So let's take a look at these questions and see why they're correlated. Well, quality of leadership and social support are probably related in many people's minds, and we should maybe ask whether we should combine the questions of these two scales into a single scale. Vertical trust and justice and respect were also close together, and we actually call this combination social capital. So it's already recognized as a single entity, and so there's probably good reason to combine these into a single scale and call it social capital. Internal consistency is how well the questions within a scale hang together. And it's rated in variety. And this is an evaluation of a recent survey that I did. And you'll notice here that influence did not pass the internal consistency or reliability tests. And when we looked at it, we found out that this workplace had a lot of decision latitude. They had a lot of influence in how they did the work, but they didn't have any influence in how much work. And so that tells us something that's unique to this workplace. And that's why looking at whether these scales work or not in reality is important. Here's another scale, PHQ-4, which examines depression and anxiety. So we had these scales that in our pandemic surveys, and we've incorporated them now into our general survey. You can see there's a lot of overlap between the two. And when we did the reliability, they were reliable each way, and so we can use these scales separately or together as a single scale. Then we have test-retest. If you give the same question to a person 2 weeks after they've originally filled it out, how close will their results be, given that nothing has changed in the workplace? A perfect reliability is exactly the same score. Here's some results from the PHQ-4, and you'll see that the correlation is about 0.73. And when we do the test-retest using the intra-class correlation coefficient, we get almost the same number. So it's not always the same, but in this case it was. However, when we looked at these test-retest, we found that for English, it worked well, 0.74. However, the French version did not. And so that's something to explore why in the French surveys, it didn't work as well. Then we have predicted, convergent, and discriminant validity. What this means is burnout, we see are related to quantitative demands, work pace, emotional demands, insecurity over employment, and organizational justice. And we want this to be different than engagement. And when we look at engagement, we see we have different items, influence at work, meaning at work, predictability, recognition. Organizational justice is common to both of them, but essentially they're measuring different things. We don't want everything to measure the same thing. And here's an example. We looked at people who do not work any extra hours and broke it down whether they're in management or not management. We see their quantitative demands are relatively the same. A meaningful difference is a difference of at least 5 or more. And when we looked at people who work 6 or more extra hours without getting paid, we see very much the same thing. A very similar experience, however, very much different than no extra hours. With work pace, we saw quite a difference between management and non-management, almost 10 points lower for non-management. And we also see a significant difference between management and not management. So putting in extra hours without pay for management is not as serious for work pace as it is for related to work pace as it is for those who are not in management. Emotional demands were the same. And here we see that for managers working 6 hours or more without pay, their emotional demand score was 52, whereas for those who were not management was 67. And part of this is working extra hours in management means something different than it does working extra hours if you're not in management. And we're actually writing a paper right now, and we call this one at the end wage theft. There are a number of English language surveys, and I'll go through them. I'll start with the last one there, the US, and I'll show you which ones have validation studies. Healthy Work Campaign, it has an article that's been published that shows the evidence for validation. People at Work is an Australian version, and they took a different approach. They said, we're going to use scales that have already been shown to be valid, and we'll hope that they're valid also in our context. In the UK, they put together a short 35-item 7-factor, and they did factor analysis, confirmatory factor analysis to show that they were valid for the UK. And Ireland also uses them along with the PHQ-4. And then we have our stress assess, and we work together with Peter Smith from the IWH and did a variety of evaluations, and this was published in 2019. And we also work together with the International Network for people who use the Copenhagen Social Questionnaire. Now, Guarding Minds at Work has a new version come out in 2023, and it measures the 13 CSA factors, but it also measures the new 21 ISO factors. And it has the inclusion indicator and a stress and trauma indicator. And if you add these up, you get 150 items. However, they do this with only 65 questions. And if you're wondering how they do that, they define something as an index, which is to be understood as creating culture, not reflecting culture. And so it's a different approach to validation. And here's an example of the questions, how you have 150 items done in 64. And there's one question: I am able to do my job in a way that aligns with my values. That's in each one of these 4 measures: psychological competencies, job demands, workplace inclusion index, and the stress and trauma index. And so when we compare workload scales, we have here the quantitative demands is 2 questions, work pace is 2 questions, and emotional demand is 3 questions. In Guarding Minds at Work, workload management is 7 questions. Stress and trauma has 3 of these questions in its indicator. Works hours and schedule, which is an ISO, has 2 of these. These 2 questions are in the workload and pace, and these 2 questions are in the job security and precarious work. So if you pick any one of these questions, you could be measuring more than one thing. In the past, Guarding Minds at Work suggested that each item, each question be considered within the context of its factor. However, they have revised this, and now they say you should look at each question by itself. So we have 65 questions, we have 13 factors from the CSA, 21 ISO factors, and 2 indicators, which means you have 101 different outcomes to consider, which becomes quite overwhelming. So what is survey validity and why does it matter? WorkTango is one of the websites that addresses this question in a positive way, saying it depends on you need to depend on these surveys. However, the naysayers say that why do you really need it? You don't really need a survey of validation to understand how your people are feeling. However, if you look at this statement closely, you don't really need a survey at all to understand how your people are feeling if you're in touch with them. So summing it all up, you don't really need an evidence-based survey to assess psychosocial conditions. You don't really need a survey at all for that matter. However, a survey for which there's evidence that it performs reliably and validly in a population similar to yours allows you to know what you are measuring and that measurement is stable, it's repeatable. A workplace that is devoted to making things better can use a poor tool and still manage to make improvements. On the other hand, a workplace that is not interested in changing can use the best tool there is around and not make any progress. So it's not the tool itself that's essential, it's the commitment to change that makes it work or not. But it's easier to use a tool that a good tool makes it easier. Hopefully, this peek behind the curtain with respect to gathering evidence for survey validity and reliability will help you choose the best tool that you need to improve your workplace. So thank you, and sorry I went a bit over time.
Just a little bit. Thank you. I really like your analogy of peek behind the curtains because I often think of you as the Wizard of Oz back there with the levers and all the things happening, particularly in the statistical analysis of and the present, the creation of the report from Stress Assess that shows that picture to the workplaces who participate and the participants. I didn't see any questions. We do, but I'm happy, I think, to entertain any questions in the chat, or if someone wants to put their hand up. We do have another Slido. The ministry has asked us to report to them when people learn something from our efforts. So I would appreciate you letting us know if you think that the material that we've covered today is of interest and that it could potentially make a difference in your own health and safety or that of your workplace. Or let us know if not, I guess, too. So that helps us to plan for future events. Let me just, I don't see anything in the chat. Does anyone have a question? Or John, did you have any other sort of more, I mean, it seems so complicated, and someone has asked for the slides, which we will be, of course, uploading to our website, and it'll be linked from the Mayday webpage to a place for this specific day, which will have the 3 videos and the 3 sets of slides all linked.
Well, I just want to summarize by saying that making questionnaires can seem like the easiest thing. Throw a bunch of questionnaires and circulate them and see what you get. However, there is quite a science and an art behind making a questionnaire that you can understand that measures what it's supposed to measure reliably and validly, and that unfortunately it takes that much work to do it properly. And however, that being said, as I mentioned, any workplace that wants to improve their psychosocial conditions can probably do it no matter what tool they use. It's the motivation that makes the big difference. I've seen many workplaces use our survey, which I think meets a lot of the criteria, and not make a difference. But it was quite obvious that they weren't going to respond to it in the first place. So it's an exercise in futility, even with the best evidence-based tool.
Yeah, thanks. And yeah, I think that commitment and engagement and the planning ahead of time are critical, and the anticipation that you know that you will use the survey results to, to inform change, or at least to inform dialogue about the positive news and the negative news, and then that you'll do something to try and address it. I don't know, Kathy, if you wanted to make any comment about having used our stress assess tool. I guess you weren't there at IHSA all 3 times. I don't think. Maybe you were. I'm not sure.
But it's 4 times now.
Yeah, you guys are our class and having been the most surveyed organization, I think, right, John? Although I could be wrong.
Oh, there are some others too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, no, I'd say that the tool from OHCOW, the stress assess, is a great tool. But to your last point there, John, it has a lot to do with the commitment of the organization, what you're going to do with that. And our last round of the survey, we spent a long time. We spent 6 months sort of assessing the results internally and going from group to group and engaging key stakeholders and even having further follow-up sessions, and then developing 32 recommendations from that, engaging that process. So it's what you do with it, and then again, what you do with those recommendations. And I'm pleased to say IHSA has been taking a due diligence and working really hard on implementing as many of those recommendations as possible, So yeah, I'm looking forward to the next results. Stay tuned, John.
Okay.
Great, thanks. Okay, well, we have gone over time, and I don't see any other questions aside from a thank you. And I didn't have my slide open, but it does look pretty positive. So thanks to those who responded and said that they agreed that that the content would be of assistance personally or professionally. That's what we strive to do, and we're always here if people have questions, or if they about our tools, or about the presenters and about the other content. And we do have one more session this month. Next week, on the 29th, we'll host PSHSA, who will talk about their new workplace violence risk assessment in the education sector, which Christy mentioned earlier today. So we'll hear a bit about where they've gone with that. And also they have another new risk assessment, which on harassment, I think. Sorry, I'm drawing a blank since I didn't switch my screen to reading. And then of course we have Daryl Stevenson, who's one of the OHCOW ergonomists, talking about our new job demands analysis tool, which is called Job Assess, which includes psychosocial components of a job as part of assessing the demands of that job in advance from a prevention perspective, prevention of harm perspective, and also to be used for early and safe return to work, potentially, to understand what the hazards might be, the physical hazards and the psychosocial hazards might be to people returning to work, which is where pain management actually could come in. And so there's an element of that too. So I hope you can join us next week. Any final comments, Kathy or John, about today's session?
No, I just want to again say thank you, and I did drop in the chat some resources as well, and so yeah, if you haven't had a chance to grab them now. But thank you.
Great, thanks. John, anything? Did we lose him? He may have disappeared.
I think you may have.
Okay, well then, it must be lunchtime. Okay, thanks again, everybody. See some of you next week. Take care.